All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of NX. I don't know, what do we call this webinar?
NX Cloud.
NX Cloud. Welcome to this episode of NX Cloud, the webinar. We've got myself here and Victor, Yuri, why don't you introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Victor. I'm a co-founder of Narwhal, and I guess the main architect of NX and NX Cloud.
Yeah, I'm Yuri. I'm a GD and architect at Narwhal. I recently started in January, and I'm working on NX Cloud and NX.
And I'm Jeff. I guess I didn't introduce myself, but yeah, I'm Jeff Cross, one of the other principal architects at Narwhal and a co-founder. All right, so today we're going to talk about something we've been working on for a while, and now lots of our friends and customers are using, which is NX Cloud. And Yuri, why don't you take it from here? And so we're going to do a demo first, and that's Yuri's going to take it. But then we're going to take some questions, and you can post those questions. Let's see. There's a chat on the YouTube live stream that you're welcome to post in, and we'll be keeping an eye on that if you want to ask anything related to this. And then we've got so we'll have some time after the demo where we can go through those questions. So Yuri.
Cool. So let me share my screen. Let me know when you see it.
Mm-hmm.
Good. All right. So here I have already an NX example repository. So basically, this is our NX examples actually, which you can go to our Narwhal GitHub repository and find there. It's basically our experimentation playground where we have a couple of applications in here. I think this one is a React application, and then we have also an Angular application. And they basically share a couple of libraries below here. And just to show that I can actually go and run our dependency graph visualization. So now you can basically see here, this is the dependency graph. You can see our applications here. And they have some libraries which are part specifically of one of the products. Like one application here might have a subset of libraries down here. And then there's the other application which is having a subset of libraries down there. And there are also shared ones. Like as you can see down here, basically, there are a couple of shared libraries which both of them use. Now, this is actually not a huge repository. It's kind of like a small to medium size, if you want. But it's just the purpose of like showing you what we are dealing with here. And so what I could do, for instance, to get started here is start building our application, right? So let me go and build, for instance, the products application. Now, I'm basically using NX to build that, and I can just like run NX run products.build. And I'm prefixing it with yarn because I did install NX globally, but in case you don't have to prefix it with yarn or npm run. So let's see. So this runs now through the Webpack build and should produce us the output, which we usually expect. Like it should have some assets being built to the dist folder. So here we go. And if I go to that dist folder, see here applications, products, and we see the products up here. Like this is the whole output that's being created usually by an Angular application. Now, let me do one thing. Let me remove that dist folder again, and let me run the comment again. What you see now, we already got the output basically printed out. So how did it work? What you've seen here is actually the caching, which we have built into NX. And this is kind of a computation caching. So what it does basically is it takes the command which you executed and involved assets and libraries and source files, basically, and basically caches the output locally in your NX workspace. And so you can see that also via that console output here, which is printed at the very beginning. And again, also, if I go to the dist folder, so it doesn't just print output, obviously, to the console here, but we also get all the files back, right? And so this is a local cache, which we store in the node modules.cache. You can see here. It works mostly with all of the basically targets which you can specify. So if we go, for instance, to the Angular JSON here, which is the usual setup, you have in an Angular application inside our NX workspace. You can also have that as a workspace.json in case you don't use Angular, but you just create an NX-based workspace. And here, this is our products application. And this has a couple of targets here, right? So there's this architect node, which has like a build step, a serve step, linting step, test step, and so on. And so in theory, we could not just run this for build, but we could also run it for testing, for instance. So let me just execute that again. And what I'm doing, I'm actually using this time the nx run many command with the target test, just that we have like a lot more things being executed. So let's just get this printed out. So you see this already takes a while because like a lot of tests are being run. Like we executed all tests which are present here in our monorepo workspace. And so once this goes through, I do the same thing, right? I clear, I do again run the same command. And again, like we get, boom, in one step, like all of the things being printed out. So we don't have to rerun the test again because obviously NX figured out that we didn't change any source file. So it doesn't have to recompute the whole step of executing the tests and stuff, but it just can basically print out our comment output, which we got before. Now, to demonstrate,
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Actually, I know the answer, but I think it's good to point out here. So NX Cloud, we talk about it being a computation cache, and I think people kind of think of it as a way that you just store assets somewhere and then you retrieve them. But talk about how it's replaying the results here, not just like pulling some build artifacts, but actually showing what's here, like showing the test results.
Yeah, basically what it does is based on the command here, and maybe Victor also can add his basically more deep technical underlying knowledge about how it's actually being done underneath. But what NX does, it already knows how the workspace looks like. So it knows basically the projects and the libs and apps that are involved in when the command is being run. And based on that, it basically hashes the files. And so it hashes the files, and it also basically takes the output and stores basically those two information together. And then next time we run again, it does a rehash of the same things that are being involved. And based on that, basically it is able to determine, okay, for this target and this piece of library, I have to actually rerun the computation, while for something else, I don't have to. Mm-hmm. And that's also the case, for instance, here, right? Because like it isn't stupid in that it just takes the command here. And this is basically the key for storage, but it goes and looks into the source files and hashes those. And we can, for instance, also prove that, right? Because like if I execute this one here, we get all the caching being printed out. But for instance, if I go and pick a test here, let's say the card page test here, for instance, let's go here. I have here that test, for instance, right? And I go in here and do a console log. Let's do a nice wavy emoji here. So I changed actually the source now of that test. And what I can do now, again, rerun the same command. So Next will, again, traverse the tree. You can see now we get cached outputs for some parts, but actually if the test run finishes and I scroll up, you can see actually our console log being printed out. So Next is able to figure out which parts changed and which didn't, and just only executes what has actually changed.
Yeah, no, that's right. if I may, I just want to add a few minor points, which probably most people don't care about. Is that so we capture the file stuff and the output, as you pointed out, right? So the std out and std error, right? And we try to do it in a way that makes it look as if you run the command, right? So most of the time we do it absolutely perfectly. Sometimes when you replay, you can see like a few things that you might want to tweak, right? But the idea is that we basically run your process, and the next caching works on the process level, right? So it doesn't matter what you run, Node, Java, .NET, Go, Rust, whatever, right? Doesn't matter, right? We run the process, and we use OS primitives, right, to instrument the process, essentially to sort of wrap it around, to capture std out and std error, get that right into a file, right, and cache that together with the artifact produced by the command, right? So in this case, we can replay it legitimately, right? Meaning that it's not just the std out that you see, But if you're running like a Webpack and you see a lot of like in progress stuff, right, you will see that as well as if it's happening, just much faster.
Exactly. Yeah, and in case you're also wondering, like I mentioned before, we are caching basically the targets, or you can actually use the cache with the targets in your Angular JSON. But you have the options to specify what you actually want to cache, right? So this is just a default configuration which gets generated in that nx.json file, which is in the root of your workspace. And so there you see basically those cacheable operations, and you can fine tune them. Like, can you say like build, I don't want to cache building for some whatever reason. Like one candidate, for instance, might be end-to-end tests, depending on how you write them, right? Like if you hit the server, for instance, that would mean like you have a side effect potentially, which is outside of your control. So Next cannot know about what happened on the server side. And so in that case, those end-to-end tests, you might not want to cache them, because then you might get into like wrong results potentially. All right, but again, like what we've seen here is just local caching. So everything, as mentioned, gets stored in that local node modules file. And so it's just for you, basically. Like your own local build commands or linting commands or testing commands would speed up, but others cannot benefit. And that's actually where NX Cloud comes into place, which we want to talk about today. Because what it does basically is it takes that local NS, that local .cache folder into the cloud and makes it available to your coworkers, even your CI system, for instance. And so you can basically share the cache between each other. And so let's look into how we actually set that up. Actually, quite straightforward. So I'm going to go command line first. What I'm doing is, first of all, I'm adding that narwhal NX Cloud package. And then I'm also executing immediately a command. So once a package is installed, I'm adding that NX generate at narwhal NX Cloud init. And what it will do is it will basically initialize our workspace such that it works with NX Cloud. So let's get this running.
And so this is what you run for an NX workspace that already has or doesn't already have NX Cloud. What versions of NX does it work with?
I think it should be 8.12 onwards, but correct me, Victor, if I'm wrong.
Onwards. So if you're using an earlier version, it will update you to 8.12, I believe. So not I believe, I know for sure, right? So if you have any 8+ version, it will either just install Cloud and will work, or if you are sort of behind, it will push you to the right version, right? And then we'll install NX Cloud.
All right, cool. So what you see here, what happened is basically, first of all, the package got installed, then Angular did its recomputation. And then we get here a console log being printed out, some information. Basically, what the NX Cloud init command did, it's actually already set up a workspace for us on NX Cloud. And you can actually activate that workspace or claim that workspace if you want. You don't have to, but you can basically via that link. And so let me just copy that for later, maybe. And before we head over to the website, let's just see now the difference, right? So again, what I'm doing, let's first of all run again that target on all commands. So again, run the tests. Now they rerun now because what I did is I modified the package JSON. I also modified the NX JSON. And so obviously like those could be side effects because we have to install a package, which could influence basically how our code works. And therefore like NX re-executes basically the command. So let's go through that. All right. So now what I'm doing is I'm actually going to clear the local cache folder. Right? I'm cleaning it out. And that's obviously not something you do on your own machine normally because you actually want to use that local cache. But that could be the situation where I'm basically a coworker, which basically takes down, does a git clone of the repository, a git pull of the latest version, and just reruns tests or whatever locally, right? And so in this case, even though I've basically removed the cache locally, you can still see I have the same effect. So I still get the caching and the same nodes basically printed out about that it has been fetched from the cache. The only difference what you see now is that last node here, basically that 9 projects were retrieved from NX Cloud. So what NX does in this case is it checks locally for a local cached version. And if it isn't there, it basically goes and fetches it from NX Cloud, or checks basically on NX Cloud where there is some matching cached version there, and then pulls it down. And so in this way, for instance, you can see how you could actually go and share that with your coworker or even in a CI system, right? And so the changes that have been applied basically to our project by setting up NX Cloud is mostly here, so in the task runner. So apart from actually obviously installing the package, you see a couple of more options. We still have that cacheable operations, so that works the same way. But we also now use the NX Cloud runner instead of the local one. And we also got a token that has been installed basically here on our local workspace, which will allow us basically to communicate with NX Cloud. All right, so let's see if there are no questions for now. Let's see and go to the actual NX Cloud.
There are a couple questions that we can answer. And so I think one thing worth reiterating is that everything that you need to connect is inside that NX JSON. So nothing else was needed to connect to the cloud. You didn't have to go to any app or anything to set it up. So once you push this, anyone else who checks out the project will also be connected to the cloud and taking advantage of that cache right away. Exactly. But you can go to the app once you've got it set up, and you can claim your workspace and then see some of the analytics for the build. Yeah, exactly.
Like, I mean, if you wish, you could just like continue and don't even claim the workspace because we recently added basically a free monthly coupon of about, I think, 5 hours, which got reset. And so you could just benefit from those 5 hours, have that basically installed locally, and you don't have to actually go to the application. Mm-hmm. What application gives us is more, as you mentioned, like analytics, right? And so just to show you how to set it up, I copied previously that link that was printed out locally. We will see how you could do it if in case you missed that link. But in theory, like you could just install NX Cloud, click that link, and it would bring you basically to this page here. Now, depending on whether you're already registered or logged in, you would obviously go first through the login process or registration. And then you end up here on the NX Cloud for setting up a new workspace. You can see a couple of steps have already been done. That's basically because we locally executed that command. And so that did take care of most of the steps already. It also copied over already the local token, which we got. So this is the same token which we have here in our NX JSON. And so now if I go ahead, here's some basic descriptions about the 5 hours per month free and some more information. And so now if I go here to our workspace, we can actually see our local workspace. It uses the name of our NX workspace, so it just like copies it over. You have the possibility to change that. And you also see a couple of information things here. So first of all, NX Cloud detected that there has already been some cache being pushed up. And that's basically what we have seen before, right? Because I deleted the local cache. And so when I re-executed it, that cache has already been there because it has been pushed up when the first run did take place. And so that's why NX Cloud already recognized that. It's still waiting for data aggregation. And that's mostly, I'd say a technical thing, which we do. Like we run aggregations every, I think, 10 minutes. And so that's why you don't see any data right now. As an NX Cloud admin, I can actually go and force that step. Just let that we see basically what you would see basically after the first aggregation test taking place. And so now here you basically see some initial chart. You don't see much, of course, because I just executed the test step for now. And you see basically that bar chart, which the entire one basically represents the amount of time that's used for the command to run. And now you can see like half of that has already been saved because like one user ran it, like me the first time, and then another user was able to already save from it, which was basically the second time. All right. Now I can actually show you before we walk through.
Just think of all the things you could do in 1 minute. I mean, that's enough to read a poem. Or Victor, what could you do in 1 minute?
Like it takes me a minute to get ready. So
hug your baby. Okay, yeah. So
I just put in
60 minutes to get ready. You mean like brushing your teeth and everything?
No, to get ready to think about what I can do in 1 minute.
Oh, okay.
I'm a slow starter. Brush your teeth in a minute. What is it like?
Yeah, I spend at least 5 minutes brushing my teeth.
Yeah, half an hour at least. Mm-hmm. Just every morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, never mind. I was gonna say the blood. Never mind. I won't talk about brushing my teeth until they bleed.
Okay, let's move on. Yeah, so Yuri, please.
Yeah, so
save us.
basically this is just like obviously a local run. I've opened up here our NX Cloud repository for NX. So we recently actually switched our NX repository to be built with NX itself. And we obviously also activated NX Cloud. And I'm not sure for how long, Victor, we did run that, but we can already see
Yeah,
a
it
lot
was
of
about a
hours
week.
have been saved.
Yeah, it's about a week. The actual savings should be higher. The first week is weird because all the PRs still run without it. So you need to only new PRs actually use it. But even for those new PRs, we already saved 200 hours, which is crazy.
Wow. All right.
Yeah,
So what could you do with 200 hours, Victor?
Oh my God. Yeah. Keep going. Don't
Don't even try to wait for an answer.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know.
Yeah, so here, like on an NX repo, obviously we see a lot of end-to-end tests because like that's what takes most of our time there. Like most of our CI basically runs through end-to-end tests. Now, if you, for instance, switch to another one, which is like our private internal repository, which is more like if you want a more traditional mono repository, you see like these commands are more balanced out. Like you see like a lot of builds, linting, which is going on, of course, with every PR is being made or test execution. So these are just like some examples these to have. All right, but to go back and just quickly walk through what you can do right now in NX Cloud. Like right now, this is like one of our first versions. So expect there's will be a lot more info, especially here in that dashboard. Like we have a lot of plans on how to improve that. Right now, what you can obviously do is like you can edit your workspace, like you can change the name or even delete it if you created for some wrong reason. You have here the managing of the access tokens. So basically the token which you see here behind in our NX JSON, this is the one which you see here in that manage access token. So if for some reason you have to copy it over again, like could go here and copy it here from here. You also have the possibility to create new ones. And if you create new ones, you give it a name, and you can also decide whether it's read-only or read-write. The reason for having to create new ones is that you could actually have a different one for CI and also limit the permissions for the keys for like local users, or even, for instance, if you have like a public repository. Now, what's the difference between read-write? Here, basically, there is a link. If we click that, we try to explain like the main difference, so you can like read through that. The main thing is that if you have a read-write token, as I do, or as is the default configuration which we generate, then I can actually obviously benefit from cached versions that others pushed up, but I can also push up my own changes. So whenever I run a command, if I have a read-write token, it will get pushed into the cloud, such that others can benefit from it. The read token is like the opposite, right? So I can benefit from cached things that others pushed up, but my local runs won't get pushed to the cloud. That's the main difference, basically. And another thing that's also often being asked is, I don't actually want to maybe expose that token here in my repository. Like if you have a private repository, that's obviously not a big deal. But maybe if you have like an open source project, or even like if you want to override this, for instance, in CI, you might not want to use this one because it's just read-only, for instance, but you might want to use the read-write token. Then basically you can also use that environment variable. So you just like set that, and that will then override the one token that is already present in your NX JSON, if there is one. All right, so that's so much for like the managed access tokens. Last point is also billing and coupons. As I just mentioned before, we introduced that free tier, which means like you get 5 hours per month, and they get renewed like once the month is over. And so you could just like get going with NX Cloud. You don't have to enter any credit card or anything. You could just go ahead and benefit from those 5 hours. And then there is the other thing, which like if you go over those 5 hours, because if you like NX is really valuable, like I can already do so much more in 5 hours, but I need more, right? Because like you have a big team or someone, then you can go and set up your own billing basically by providing name, credit card. And you also have the possibility, let me just quickly fill in some fake data here. And you also have the possibility to limit that. So you can say like, I'm willing to spend, I don't know, $100, $500, whatever you're comfortable with, and set that up. And you will then get basically those amount of corresponding time saved with NX Cloud. All right, so that's, I think, pretty much it for now.
All right, cool. We've got some good questions coming in here. So first one is, is it possible to run NX Cloud on company's infrastructure or on-premise or behind company firewall? Victor, is it possible?
It's going to be possible soon. So we are working right now on having a version that people can use. Right, and we have a few companies we are going to try it out with first. Right, so I imagine after we do the initial initial run with those folks and get some feedback and improve it, I will make it publicly available, which probably will happen around mid-July, maybe even before that.
Mm-hmm. We do have a form somewhere for people to sign up who are interested in it, and I'll try to get the link to that before the end here. And
one thing, can I add one thing real quick? So there are a couple of reasons for why would you want to do it, right? If the reason is that you're afraid that so the whole communication between your machine and the cloud is encrypted, right? But the storage, in principle, right, like the storage of artifacts, right, by default is not encrypted, but you can set up end-to-end encryption as well. If you in the configuration file, if you set the secret key or whatever, right, you're going to encrypt it on your machine, and if you share the key with your teammates, you can all decrypt it. But we like the narwhal, right? People won't be able to see your artifacts, right? Because we don't know the key. So if your fear is that, Jeff is going to look at your, minified bundles or whatever, that's very easy to work around right now. It already works, not a problem. But I understand that for a lot of companies, that's not the main fear. They actually have to run it like in the infrastructure, and that's coming soon.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, we're excited about that. And there's a link that I'll try to get, but there's a form that you can fill out that once we have some info, we can send it to you. What are some functional differences between Bazel and NX Cloud?
That's fantastic. It's a good question. So it's also like a challenging question in that Bazel is not like a one-to-one to NX Cloud, because Bazel is a build system plus mechanism for distributing, computation artifacts and doing distributed builds. So a more what we should compare is not Bazel to NX Cloud, but Bazel to NX plus NX Cloud, right? Because that's you're going to see like similar stack in there, right? Most of the time, for a lot of projects, I don't think in terms of the performance you're going to get. You will see roughly the same performance with both. Bazel works differently in that it requires you to provision your build graph, right, using build files. Sometimes people generate build files from the sources, but they're still there, right? And it then uses this information to invoke tasks locally and do similar computation that we do, or similar computation caching we do with NX, right? Local caching, and then if you connect Bazel to some server elsewhere, distributed caching. So in this case, NX plus NX Cloud works very similarly, right? A lot of it is more like dev ergonomics and stuff, right? In that we don't require to provision the graph, right? The NX plus NX Cloud is built using sort of very simple node stack. You don't have to run this like an external build tool, right? And author build files in Python that in the dialect of Python, right? That you probably won't be able to do really well. So it's not a sort of a difference of principle. It's a difference between, say, the Clojure compiler and Webpack or something like that, right? Where they do bundle both of them, right? But one is is optimized for one use case. In this case, Clojure compiler is optimized for the Google use case, and Webpack is optimized more for like general use, right? So the different, like in my mind, that's the distinction, right? You can sort of do most with both. If you really like Bazel, you can use it. You're going to get same characteristics that you share your artifact with your teammates, right? And share your computation with your teammate. That is, in my experience, it's harder for people who aren't working at large tech companies or didn't come from Google to set up Bazel, right? Because it's just a very it's not the tool they're used to. It's harder to integrate. But if you're able to integrate it, then you can sort of choose the one you just prefer in terms of the ergonomics.
Cool. Plus one, everything you said. I agree. The next question we had was, how does the compute caching work for commands like tests? The lint returns the output instantly when you run the command a second time. But what about custom commands? So is it just that we happen to know how lint works, and so we're able to replay that?
Yeah, that's a good question. The idea is that the caching in this case works not on a, or rather, there are a couple of things we need to know to cache the computation as you're running. Right? Firstly, the subset of sources that command depends on, right? Because you don't depend on the whole repo. You have a giant monorepo. Lots of things that change in the monorepo all the time. Not every change should invalidate every cache, every computation, right? So we know what part of the source code depends, your computation depends on, because we know the dependency graph of your workspace. It's a bit more nuanced than that, because some parts are either outside of your graph, like node modules, but whatever, right? Roughly, we need to know the sources, right? That's one thing. Secondly, we need to know what you're running, like, for example, build, all the flags, etc. It doesn't matter if you're doing like ng run or like an x run or an x build, like as long as the target is the same, right? And finally, you can produce some like runtime variables. For example, like an end variable you care about, or like the OS you're running on, whatever. Right? So those are the three things we need to know, right? And they, for us, to us, uniquely describe the computation, right? In that we know the sources, we know the command, and the command means like test or build or whatever custom thing you have, right? And we know the runtime, right? We don't need to know anything else, right? So meaning that as long as you're saying, I'm running test for this project, right? And the configuration for test is that, right? We actually don't care what your test does. Right? It's not interesting to the caching mechanism, because the caching works on a process level, right? We do a few interesting things there to capture standard output and std correctly from the process, but we just run processes and we cache artifacts that those processes create, and we cache the output that these processes produce, right? So if you have a process that just says echo 1, 2, 3, right, and you use something like the run commands builder to invoke it, like this is your target, it will be cached just as well, because it's still a process. Like, we don't care, right? The only things you might have to do is that we have some ways to automatically deduce where your files have been placed, right? If your process is some like places files in a very unique place, right, somewhere else, right? Okay, then you might have to tell us. In this case, you say like the outputs aren't where we would normally look at them, right? Where most of the time you see them, but they will be in a very different place, right? And here where they are, right? That's the only thing you might have to do. Other than that, it doesn't matter what you run, right? It doesn't have to be Node, let alone test or lint. Anything you can run, right, will be cached just as well, because we simply invoke processes and look at the outputs, right, the processes create.
I think the important part is that you have to have a target, right? And so if you have your custom node script or something, just make it into a target. There is actually, if you go to our nx.dev website in the documentation, there is something called, as you mentioned, run commands. And I think many people don't know about that, but that's basically a way to create a target in your Angular JSON or workspace JSON, which then NX can actually know about and then cache as well, right? And so that's the best way to go. Just don't like chain your custom node command in your like npm script somewhere, but rather create a target and invoke that one.
Yeah, even if you have an npm script, if your target simply invokes npm script, your target just does npm run blah, right? That thing will be cached, right? Because it's just a process, right? We don't really care what it does.
So we got another question here. This was an interesting one. So does NX differentiate in, like, say in a library you have your source files and your test files? Does NX differentiate between those to see if something that depends on that library, but like that library only their source files, not their test files? Does NX take that into consideration when looking at things that depend on that library?
Right now it doesn't. So it's a very good question. So it just complicates the graph a little bit, not fundamentally hard to do. So for the simplicity's sake, it doesn't, which means that sometimes you have to compute more than you need. So if you like change a test file, right, and you have an app that depends on it, it will it will recompile the whole. It will have to recompile the app, right? Even though you as a human being know that the test file shouldn't affect. Even more so, it's not just a test file or production files. If you compile the lib, for example, you can have some things like DTS files that describe the public API of your lib, right? And you have the implementation of your lib. And you could say that for some computation, not for all of them, but for some computation, you only care about the public API, right? Meaning that for type checking, for example, if you need to type check another lib against your lib, you actually don't care if the implementation of the method changed, right? Because it doesn't matter as long as the API remains the same. So it can be made a lot more precise in there, right? And the trade-off there would be the more precise it is, the more you have to think about it, right? But the less computation you have to do. So sort of it's kind of, you need to strike the balance between how hard it is for people to set it up, right? Like, do they have to think about it all the time? And how much unnecessary computation they do when they the idea in our case with test file and prod files is that most of the time, if you change a test file, you're likely to change the implementation as well, right? Very rarely you just like add test and you do anything in your PR, right? You'll probably change something in that library that would correspond to the test file, right? So it's sort of like ends up being a moot point. Whereas the DTS files is a more interesting thing because that actually is a lot more probable, where you would change the implementation but not the public API. And such, some things will have to be recomputed, like you have to rebundle the app because it cares about the implementation. It contains your library, right? But you may not have to like relink some stuff, right? Because from linking point of view, nothing changed. Right?
Yeah, run commands is such a cool Swiss Army knife of I have friends who are like, okay, I have this massive repo, and I'm thinking about moving to NX, but I don't want to have to do all the stuff or like go to the new format and move to NX's builders. It's like you don't actually have to. You can just move to NX really in place without even having to change your existing structure, and then use run commands to just invoke whatever build you're already using, and then you can gradually from there move more to NX.
Yeah, that's sort of the coolest part, is that it actually like almost doesn't matter what your repo does, right? You can put any chunk of code in a folder, wrap your npm script or whatever commands you run, maybe in invocations, right, with a target, right, with basically a 2-line configuration, and suddenly you have caching working.
Mm-hmm. I have a question from myself. Why is it important, or what is the impact of what NX Cloud does? Why should I care? I mean, okay, yeah, it's faster, but like, what is that?
There are a few reasons. So if you one reason is that some things are fundamentally possible with distributed caching that are not possible without it, right? So for example, if you're building a very, very large application, right, and it takes, I don't know, 10 minutes for you to run ngserve. And it's not unheard of, right? We have clients who have a very large application, and it takes forever for them to to do the initial build so they can have a Webpack process running or whatever, right? This is basically a very hard to deal with scenario. Like what is the best way to split it or whatever, right? One way to split it is to split the computation in multiple computations, have like incremental builds, such that when you pull your repo and you run serve, you can reuse most of this computation done by someone else, mostly probably done by CI. CI is likely to build everything because you're probably pulling some branch from CI, right? So you are going to run that, right? And suddenly, instead of waiting for 10 minutes to do the initial serve, it takes a few seconds, right? And that's a fundamental difference, that you can now build much larger applications. And most of the time, the serve commands or whatever is much faster because you are relying, the total amount of computation is done is the same, but it's just done before, right? And you're reusing the results, right? You have to do something, but it's by and large, you're able to scale your development to much larger apps and still be somewhat productive, right? So that's one thing. Fundamentally possible. Without it, you have to do something like that, right? I mean that no matter how smart you are, if you don't share your computation with your peers, right, or with your CI, then at some point you have to rebuild everything, and it sucks, right? So the only way not to have to rebuild everything is to share the. So that's the fundamental thing that's possible now, not possible before. The second thing is it makes things faster. There are other ways to make things faster. You can try to distribute CI and just say, I'm going to run it on 20 different machines and collect the results back. That can work, right? It's the performance characteristics are different. And sometimes you still want to do it, but it requires effort. Usually doing like this type of distribution is, you're utilizing some agents that you have to, purchase or whatever, but also requires you to maybe rethink how your CI is done. Your naive way of building CI is like, I'm just doing build, just doing test, like that no longer works. You have to have partition work appropriately, right? And even then, if you partition this work, if you think about it, if you have a thing that you need to build before something else builds, like library of component that has to be built before you build your app, well, I mean, with cache, it's very trivial that when library is built, it put in the cache, your next agent picks up the work, gets on the cache, and runs, right? If you don't have that, so how are you going to transfer files between agents? Are you going to it's possible. It's just a lot more work. You can stash them in, stash them. There are ways to do it.
That's kind of the story of everything in NX. NX doesn't do anything you couldn't do without NX. It's just it makes a lot of things free that otherwise require a lot of engineering or coordination or bookkeeping work.
Exactly. So
but in general, I think that the time saved is something people often underestimate. I think it is the combination between ease of setup, right? Because we've seen just that one command and you already provisioned your local NX workspace for NX Cloud. But what we have also experienced, or myself, what I have experienced with client work is also when the sprint goes towards the end, people try to merge in as much as possible into the main line, right? Into master, whatever. And so the CI it can really get a race, right? Because you push it up, and then you have to make a minor change because someone reviews or requests it. You have to pull it down, make the change, pull it up again, or even just do the rebasing, right? And so with caching in place, that rebuild doesn't have to take another 30 minutes, but it maybe take just a couple of minutes, and so you're much faster also to be able to push basically PRs back into the master in the main line, basically. So that's not something to underestimate.
Yeah, and that's a good point because I think that's one of the key things. So a lot of times we look at NX Cloud and we look at just what's the time saved, how much literal time does it save from one command running it with the cache, without the cache. But what's not obvious is the cascading impacts of having faster builds. So I've been on teams that have really long, drawn out builds and teams that have really fast builds. And one of the differences in the habits of those teams is that the people who have the long builds, people, subconsciously and consciously that if I'm working on a feature at the end of this, end of this effort, I'm going to have to go through that process of waiting for my pull request to get through the queue, to be tested, to be reviewed. It's going to take probably a couple of days if I'm on top of it to get it through that whole process. And so because of that, I start to pile on more things onto my pull request than I should. I start to say, okay, there's this other little to-do I need to get to. I'm going to throw that in as well so that I don't have to open up a separate pull request just to fix this one line change. Whereas the opposite being when you've got that fast queue where I can say, okay, I've got teammates who are going to review things quickly, we're all supporting each other, and I know it's only going to take, it's only going to be queued up for less than an hour, half an hour or something like that, before it gets validated for merging. Then I'll do smaller commits that are easier to review, easier to test, easier to make sure, myself, to make sure that I'm doing things well, and handle it that way. So not only does the team's overall productivity and happiness get better, but also the quality of the code improves from the habits that form from faster CI pipelines. All right. We got another question that somebody asked what a typical, let's see here, how much time would a migration take to NX on an AngularJS Nest project with default settings? And that's pretty hard to say, but I would say 10 minutes, probably.
I mean, it depends on the degree when you consider migration to be complete, right?
I was just kidding, by the way, when I said 10 minutes. Nobody.
It actually can be 10 minutes. So we have a new. Maybe I will talk about secret command or not. I don't know. We'll see. It's supposed to be announced later this week. Anyway, but the idea is that if you are thinking, if you have an Angular CLI project that has Nest stuff in it, then it's most of the time you have something working, right? In 10 minutes, not 10 minutes, but if you sit down, before lunch, you'll be done. But you have something working, you have an NX workspace that is not optimized in that an NX shines when you start splitting your apps and them out per lib, blah, 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 all the step things, right? So it won't be optimized, but it will be technical NX workspace. You're going to have caching working. and other stuff that NX provides will be working as well, right? That usually doesn't take very long time, especially if you have an Angular CLI project. But even if you don't have an Angular CLI project, have like a create React app project, a very different type of project, right? Putting that into NX and using something like run commands to define targets, again, can be done relatively fast. Okay, maybe not before lunch, have to wait till the end of the day or whatever, but it is fast, right? That's not a problem. That part of the migration is very easy, right? Because again, NX, if you just put a bunch of files in a folder and you define a bunch of run commands to invoke things against that folder, technically on NX workspace, caching works, everything else works. So that can happen within minutes, right? It's more if you want to start partitioning the things into libs, more precisely define the dependency graph. Okay, that's sort of an ongoing work, right? And that can take a long time because it requires you to sort of clean up your repo, define public API for different parts of your repo, etc., right? And that can take a much longer time, but that doesn't have to be done right away. You can do it gradually over the period of, as you work on features and stuff, right? So period of months and stuff. So the answer is, it's either very little to do an initial work. If you want to have a very good canonical, beautifully put together NX workspace, okay, that may require some time.
Amanda suggested showing the secret command, but I'll leave it up to either of you if you want to do that. But yeah, so that, it is something that we want to make a simpler transition. So right now, there's a few things you have to, when moving from Angular CLI to NX, a few things you have to accept, like the folder structure being one of them, apps and libs, and other than that, it's mostly the same way of working. So, Victor, do you want to show it?
I don't have it with me, so I can I can just say what it is, right? And then basically there is a command that you can run in any Angular CLI workspace, right? In any CLI project that you have, and it will make it an NX project without moving any files around. So it will look exactly like your Angular CLI project, but with caching on, local and distributed, right? So in this case, that takes 20 seconds. You can run it, and in 20 seconds, you have caching on for any Angular CLI project, right? Both local and distributed. You don't even have to think that it's an X, right? You still it looks exactly the same as before, just with caching on. So that takes 20 seconds. So technically, Jeff was correct, right? So if that's what you to reach that bar, right? You just run one command, you say yes, and then boom, yeah, it's there.
All right, Bramborg Riv is bugging me to answer his two questions. Let's see. I saw one of them, but his was more like a troubleshooting question. So I just wanted to save that for the end, and we can let's see. He was just saying, so when he changes here, let me just show his question here. Okay, here we go. When I change my NX plugin and only change one of the templates, the cache does not seem to be invalidated. Could we get an option to include certain folders in our cache hash?
Okay, we need I would say you can send a repro. If it's part of the sources that you have, the cache should be invalidated. That will take all the sources. If you have just a folder which is not part of sources, you probably want to make it there are two ways you can do it. You can either make it a source, just create a project in workspace.json and include that, right? That folder with templates, or you can also technically use runtime inputs to basically invoke a node process that is going to do manual hashing of that folder. So it's a good question. We can. We might be able to provide something like that. I need to think more about it. If you want to include external folders, right, as part, because the idea, for example, if you have an Angular CLI project, is that the sources of your project is what your project should depend on, right? It shouldn't depend on anything else. So in your case, it looks like it's not part of the sources of your project, and so the question is why isn't it, right?
I think the best would be to have a repro somewhere, so we could actually take a look, because It's kind of strange.
All right, B-Man, send a repro. I did see your second question, though. I mean, if you type it again, then we can answer it. Let's see. Somebody had kind of an unrelated but interesting one, was how to import GraphQL files, like not GraphQL files, in TypeScript files. Or, I assume like wanting to get schema types.
If you want to import a schema file, like schema file, right?
I don't know
like
if that's what they had in mind.
Dot schema. We just usually require those, right? Like in that we just type use require, and then Webpack figures it out. If we use like a roll loader, right? A roll loader would just load the source that you can then pass to, for example, Nest.js or Express, or whatever you use to actually do stuff with that schema file. That's what we personally do for our internal stuff. Because at the end of the day, NX doesn't actually build anything. Like the Webpack and lots of other things, NX has plugins for build this stuff, right? So if you use Webpack to build your application, you can use Webpack like a roll loader to require whatever you want, including schema files, right? But if you're building your application using something else entirely, then you need to look at how that tool would allow that, right?
Okay, cool. If we didn't answer your question, actually, it's a good chance to plug the Narwhal community Slack, which is a Slack that folks in the community put together. So it's a lot of NX discussion. If you have questions, want to get other people's input on things they've done with NX, it's a good place. It's got hundreds of people in there. I don't know exactly how many people, but it's pretty active. And let me see. I'll post the link to that in the comments here. So hopefully folks who are viewing this after the fact will be able to find that, because you have to use the Slack invite link.
Yeah, you can also always go to our NX repository on GitHub. There is a badge at the very top, which is basically the link to the community Slack. But yeah, definitely check that out. It is hugely active. I actually just discovered it after I joined Narwhal, but it's already there like for years. So it would have been really helpful in the past.
Yeah, it's this little secret. So yeah, every time I speak somewhere, I try to mention it. Or yeah, people send me questions. I'm like, I'm the worst person to ask this question. You should just post it in Slack. All right, okay. I did find the second question from Bram, and it was about nuking the cache, which why should you? Everything works perfectly with caching. Why should you ever need to nuke anything, right?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and like Basil, for example, for those who know how it works, has a purge command. I like how the very strong language, right? You could really built by engineers, right? So it has a way to sort of ignore the cache. If you run anything in NX, you could pass --skip --skip -nx -cache, right? Basically to skip the cache. In this case, the cache remained there, right? Like it's just for that particular command, right? We are going to compute stuff from scratch, right? So in this case, because there are if you just nuke the local cache, it doesn't really help as much if you have an NX cloud, because then if something is in cloud, it's still going to get it from cloud, right? So, and you cannot remove it from cloud, right? So the removing the cache doesn't work if you have a distributed setup, right? Because the idea is that NX will always try to find it somewhere, right? So deleting your local one is not good enough. So you need to pass skip NX cache, which means don't try to find it anywhere, right? Just do it from scratch and then write it. Ideally, you should never have to do it. There are a couple of reasons why you would want to do it. For example, if you're measuring like performance, right, of certain things. Well, obviously, if you have a cache output, the performance is not it's not working, right? So it will be fast, right? So you probably want to pass that. In this case, the cache will be ignored. Another thing would be maybe you have. It's hard to. I mean, something that technically can be broken. Maybe something didn't work exactly right when you wrote it to your local cache, or maybe you just went and corrupted your local cache somehow, right? It should never happen, but if it does happen, right, you can always skip the cache, right? So that's the answer, basically. Skip a next cache. And the reason why it is like that, because you cannot really remove disabled cache. So that's not an option. If you want to delete your local cache to start from scratch locally, right, you could do that, right? You could just go and remove this folder. The last option is if you are like playing around and you're measuring different performance characteristics. I'm not sure how many people would actually do it. I do it because I actually do play around with the cache itself, right, to understand how like what's going on, etc. Right? You can have like if you add an implicit dependencies file, like just add a new file in there called like global file, right? Add it to implicit dependencies, and every change to that file is going to invalidate all cache records, right? And if you do that, then you can just go and just like add a character to the file, right? And no one should be like you shouldn't have to do it, right? Obviously, that's not desirable. I do it because I play with the cache itself, right? Ideally, you wouldn't do it, right? Because
B-Man added a comment saying that it was related to his other question. So the answer to that is get whatever file. It sounds like maybe those template files weren't in sources that NX,
right,
like in project sources that NX knew about. Right. Maybe that's not the case, but that would solve the problem. But otherwise, just add new lines at the end of your file and validate the hash. And
add a console cache works. Skip an X cache works.
Okay, you can do what Victor says, which is the proper way, or you could just add a console.log in your file. And
you'll be surprised of how many times I change the global file just to play around, especially when I'm playing with stuff on CI, where it's like I don't want to change CI configuration, right? So I would change some global file. Like, okay, let's see what's going on. You shouldn't have
I've seen some of your commit messages. Poke, touch, whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's about the end of our time. Yuri, give us some closing words. Thank you so much for doing the demo, by the way. That was awesome. Even though I've seen how things work a million times, it's always awesome to see other folks do it, and you make it look so easy because it is easy. But thank you for.
Yeah, it is really easy. Like you just, I think also Victor tweeted it out, right? You can fit it in one tweet, and that already speaks a lot about how easy it is to configure NX. I think that's a good closing word. Not anything messing with configuration files. Just execute that command, and you're good to go.
All right. So yeah, NX Cloud is out there. Go to nx.app to learn more about it. And like Yuri showed, you can run that schematic to add NX Cloud. What's the command to run? We need to tweet it or something because it's so simple to add NX Cloud to an NX workspace.
Yeah, we should even wrap it into like an npx command, because right now it's like you need to npm install then run.
We just we should combine it too.
Yeah, exactly. So it will be one thing. It will be the shortest npm script ever. It's like boom, the thing, yarn add, and then the.
Yep. So it's been out. NX Cloud's been working well for a bunch of our customers and a bunch of new folks that have jumped on board. We've been working really hard to take the feedback from people on like the setup, and that's the result of what you're showing today is really simplifying that and making it easy for anyone to take advantage. So I hope folks will take a look, and we're really responsive. We have a live chat on the site if you have questions that we keep an eye on during most hours, and we also have an email you can send questions to cloud-support@narwhal.io if you run into anything or have any questions. And excited to see what kind of savings folks get from it. Yeah. All right, thank you both, Yuri and Victor, and thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.